PFA general PFA general membership meeting. I am so thrilled to be the principal at New Canaan High School. We have the best students and the best community in the country. And, our parents are always setting up engaging in relevant topics for our parents and really setting up a wonderful environment for our kids. So at this point, welcome. I hope you all are happy to be here today. We'd love to see your faces. So please, turn on your videos if you can. And at this point, I will turn it over to one of our outstanding PFA co-presidents, Courtney Langford. So Courtney.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. I am pretty psyched about today because our speaker is really going to be someone that we can all relate to, not just in topic, but as a person. So I'm thrilled about that. And before we turn it over to the main event, I just want to cover a couple of business things. This is our October PFA general meeting. You will see a poll on the Zoom here to approve minutes from the May general meeting and from the September general meeting. So if you could please vote so that we could put those in our archives, that would be super. And then I'd like to mention a few of the upcoming dates that the PFA is sponsoring events for you and your families. You should have received a link. I saw it come in this morning, so it's rolling out today. The financial aid night is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Then the week of October 18th is Spirit Week. The kids are having a Spirit Week. We're so excited for them. Yes, homecoming is coming back. So Spirit Week during the week of October 18th, they will have a bonfire that Friday night and the game on Saturday. So please encourage your kids to take part in all of it. We are so happy for them to be in person and celebrating together. And then the next two things I'd like to mention on Tuesday, October 19th, exciting. We are going to be in person for you ninth grade families. We're going to meet at Waveney and it's going to be a casual talk and coffee with parents who've been through it all before. So if you are a freshman parent and are new, or even if you're not new, come and enjoy some camaraderie outside at Waveney on Tuesday, October 19th. And Thursday, October 21st, for you sophomore parents who haven't been through before or need a refresher, it's teen driving. That will be a Zoom presented by the Lewis School of Driving at 7 p.m. I've been through it before. I plan to do it again. It is always super helpful and an engaging evening with Lewis. And I think that's it for our business portion. If you have any questions, of course, you can always email myself. Oh, the other co-president is Jerry Moore, for those of you who don't know. You can email us. And also we have a big push this year on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So any information that you're looking for can be found there and on our website. And now I'm super happy to turn it over to Stacy Walker, who's with CARES, who will introduce our awesome speaker. Stacy.
Thank you, Courtney. One quick thing before we start. Do we need to launch the poll so people can vote?
Yes, please. If you can launch it and then you all can vote. Super. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm going to launch the poll here. And it looks as though we need to approve the minutes. So if everyone could vote, that would be great.
By the way, you were excellent at this, Stacy.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, that was quick, easy, and it looks like we're 100%. Thank you all for answering the poll. Let me just click out of it. Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Principal Egan, for having New Canaan CARES this morning. As Courtney said, I'm Stacy Walker. I'm the Education and Program Coordinator here at CARES. This morning, I am excited that we have Dr. Michelle Albright joining us for a conversation on what we've learned along the way. A little bit about Michelle. Dr. Michelle Albright is a licensed clinical psychologist. She received her PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Michelle has worked for the past 25 years with families, schools, and communities across the country to develop, implement, and evaluate programs to promote children's language and literacy development, social emotional learning, and academic engagement and achievement. Personally and professionally, she strives to educate children in the broadest sense of the word and world, and help them develop the competence to achieve success in their education, relationships, and occupations. She also recognizes the importance of helping families and educators manage their own stress and sanity while trying to nurture these happy and healthy children. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. The most important part of my bio, I like to say, is I'm also the parent of 2 high schools. I think that should be the big, bold highlight. That is what really gives me credibility and experience in all this. So today I'd like to talk about what we've learned and what we continue to learn. I'd like to make that more active than past, because I think it is an ongoing process. And I really want to be helpful to you all. So there are some things I'd like to present and address, but I welcome comments and questions as we go along, and then we'll have sort of a more formal Q&A at the end. But as I said, I really want to make this useful to everyone. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen to show some slides. All right. So I want to start with a picture of someone I've come to know and love over the course of the pandemic, Ted Lasso. And this is actually from the season finale of the current season. And as we were watching this, of course, I made a big fuss with my family. Went, wait, stop! I have to take a picture of this. I'm giving this presentation, and this is going to be perfect for it. And this was, anyone who's watched the show, he was a bit of a heated discussion, shall we say, with a colleague, and he said, "What have I got to learn here?" And I just love that, because in the middle of this sort of heated debate where he could have been defensive, he could have been reactive, he took a minute to focus on himself and what the opportunity was for learning here. And this pandemic has been a lot in a lot of ways for a lot of people, but I think it does provide a lot of opportunities for learning. And I hope that one of the things we take out of it is to continually pause and think about what we have learned, what we are learning, and how we can integrate that. And that pause of the pandemic, I know for myself and for many people, if we can kind of use that for good, and I don't mean to be dismissive about all the kind of exhausting, awful things that all came with the pandemic, but I think using that pause to figure out what can we learn here is really important. And one of the most challenging aspects of the pandemic is, in pretty much every respect, it escalated emotions, it complicated things, socially, physically, psychologically, on every aspect we could think of. It challenged us in these ways. It kind of hit everything. And it also reduced or compromised the resources we had to cope with those escalating emotions and those escalating challenges. And when we really stop and think about that, it's something. And that really is the biggest stressors of all, and the fact that it was ongoing for so long and it continues to go on, and the uncertainty that comes along with it. And it really has been quite a roller coaster of a ride. And sometimes we think the ride is about to end and smoothing out, and we get really excited, and then it gives us another surprise loop. And it's sort of one of those roller coasters that's also in the dark, so we don't know exactly when things are coming. And I would love everyone just to take a minute now to pause and think about where your ride started. Because for some people, that beginning of the pandemic, for some people, maybe wasn't that sort of big drop off. It might have been felt a little smooth, and the loop-de-loops or the drops came a little later. So just for everyone to take a moment and think about kind of where you started and where on that ride you feel like you are now. And then the how piece, kind of how are you feeling now? And I put an asterisk next to you very intentionally, because if you take a moment to pause to think about yourself, to then take a moment to pause and think about your child and children, and I use both those terms because many of us, especially those of us that have more than one child, our children react differently. So that path of the roller coaster might look one way for one of your children and a very different ride or trajectory for the other. And then think about your spouse or your partner, your family, your friends, your peers, your colleagues, and how everybody's roller coaster ride actually looks a little bit different. The twists and turns they take, the loop-de-loops, may not be paced exactly with where yours are. And I'm not sure if anyone would like to share a little bit sort of where they feel they are. Are they on an uphill or a downhill or a loop-de-loop now? If anyone would like to, I welcome that. But just really to kind of think about what this ride, what this trajectory has been like for you, as well as for other members of your family. And I can share just a little bit. As I said, I have 2 teenagers, 2 high schoolers. My older child at the beginning of the pandemic kind of was, I won't say pleased, but appreciated the pause of it. It came at a time for her where the idea of not having to go into school, not having to go into classes, felt like kind of a nice reprieve. And it was only as it sort of continued that the stressors of that magnified more, versus my younger child, who tends to be a little more social and outgoing. From day one, when everything grounded to a halt, she didn't want to pause. She was sort of ready to go. And it kind of illustrates that importance of thinking of where we started. And especially now that things are opening back up and we're trying to get back into the groove and what's the new normal, it's really important to remember that where we started. Because if we had kids, or if we are as individuals kind of more social and more outgoing, it might feel a little different than if we had kids, or we ourselves might be a little less social outgoing or less busy. So really taking that moment to pause and consider, and thinking about that ride for ourselves, and then also thinking about the differences for ourselves and our family members.
Interesting. If I could share, Dr. Albright, and maybe this will help some other people share. I have a junior as well in high school. And for my daughter, it was a challenge when the pandemic first struck socially. Academically, she kind of was actually happy about the change or the break. Then it became different because it was the hybrid, nature of school that had its own challenges. But she kind of worked through that. And then now there are different challenges. We're back to school, but the pandemic's not over. And she's taken some pretty challenging courses, and she's playing volleyball. And it's really busy. She's getting home at 9 o'clock and has several AP classes and trying to do all the work. And it's impacted her differently. Grades are probably a little worse than they were during the pandemic. And I'm hearing that from some parents, even, in the community as well. And yet the stress doesn't stop, when we're trying to work with teachers here too. So, it's kind of a wild ride. And I think the kids are really going through different emotions. And I think part of it's good. It's like, how do you reset more to normal, back to normal? But there's a shift with that, So I experienced that in my own house. I'm only sharing that for people who might be on the call to say, well, the principal's also experiencing this, that people may share. So.
Well, and I think that that's so valuable for us all to think about, and why I encourage people to take that time to really think about what this ride or the trajectories have looked like for everyone, because we've all felt it. And there's definitely some similarity in what we've experienced. But as you said, even within our own household, to sort of, if we think about it, how it shifted. And as you acknowledge, we're still in this really funky place, because in a lot of ways, homecoming's happening and kids are back at school and they eat, but it's not exactly the same. And I know I have those moments occasionally when I go to root for my daughter's team at the high school, or I'm watching the kids, I have to drop one off and I'm watching them come out. And in some ways, I'm very used to seeing everyone with masks. And then other times I have that kind of out of body experience where I go, this is so weird that we've gotten used to this. And I think it's really important for us to consider that. And especially, which you just sort of perfect setup for the next slide. Thank you very much. That asterisk about you, not only do we as people think and feel and process differently, but that teenage brain works on a very different operating system than our brain as adults. And when we think about us as thinking, feeling, experience, mature adults, and we struggle with wrapping our head around this, now let's try and consider that from the perspective of the teen brain. And the teen brain is not fully functional at the same level as our adult brains. And it's not that it's completely not operational, but different things ping differently on it. The wiring is somewhat different. And what gets really challenging, especially at the high school level, is most of our high school students look and act very adult-ish, shall we say. I know both my daughters are taller than me. They look like very sort of fairly grown individuals. They have great language skills. They're fairly relatable. But the inner workings there, that machinery, isn't working at the same rate. I often sort of liken it to a car. Like they can hit the gas really, really well. The brakes don't work as well. All those interconnections aren't totally flourishing. one of the examples, so in my private practice, I work with a lot of both young adults, teenagers, and also adults. And then I do a lot of speaking to schools and community agencies where I do both professional development training for teachers, but I do a lot of teaching to students around health education, social emotional skills, sort of how your brain works, kind of neuroscience, and how that impacts your emotions. And one of the things that I often talk about to help kids better understand their brain and how it's developing and what works. And if we took sort of a scan, if you think about sort of a PET scan where activity is associated with color, my 50-plus-year-old brain would be sort of pastel these days in terms of that limbic system emotional center. That's not the driving force in my brain. The more primary colors are that prefrontal cortex, that CEO of my brain. When we think about adolescence, it's the opposite. The primary colors really are that limbic system, the amygdala, the emotional center. That's online completely. That prefrontal cortex, executive function, what we've learned over the past few years, that doesn't fully develop until about early mid-20s. So their driving system, their operating system is a little different than ours. Now, in very typical teen brain form, I gave this presentation with some more funky slides and some more visuals to a group of high schoolers. And in teen form, one went, "Oh my God, so you're telling me I'm not gonna feel anything when I'm an adult?" And it was kind of the perfect response where I went, no, I'm not telling you that at all. But again, the systems become a little more imbalanced. Our thinking brain versus feeling brain. When you're a teenager, you're really driven by that feeling, that emotional brain. As an adult, we learn to better balance and they work together a little bit more. So it is important to kind of appreciate, empathize, understand from our kids' perspectives. We as adults are having a hard time, a challenging time integrating all this information that's coming at us. How do we manage the pandemic? How do we manage reports that are coming out, all the statistics that are coming about, the maps highlighting where the spread is, wear a mask, you can go here, it's okay to go there, but then it's not okay to go there. We have all those functioning parts in that balance, and it's still challenging for us to integrate. Now consider a child, our teens, it's even more challenging. Now, that doesn't mean we excuse them and we say they can't do it. It means we have to appreciate how we talk about this, the time and attention we give it. We need to really think about that and make sure to address it with them. And I found these fun pictures online, which I thought were great because they reminded me of sort of how it's felt with the pandemic. You can't go straight, you can't go backwards, you can't take a right, you can't take a left, right lane must right left. We're getting all this information and it seems to change often by the day, by the week, and we're being bombarded by it in a very different way. And I think again, reminding ourselves, wow, there is a lot that we are trying to navigate, that our teens are trying to navigate, and how confusing it is. And in many ways, a lot of the messages we're giving them, a lot of the encouragement we're giving them is kind of get back in there, let's get back to school, let's do homecoming, let's resume the college tours, let's really think about this stuff. But when you're doing it, be careful, because remember, it's not exactly the same, and we still have to think about those things. And that's really challenging to navigate and important for us to consider how to help our kids process it. So in addition to acknowledging and appreciating this, we also need to accept, and there's a great DBT term, dialectic behavior therapy, and I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but it's called radical acceptance. And it became my mantra, especially over the course of the pandemic. And the essence of it is we have to accept the reality that we're given, even if it's not the reality we would choose. Now, that doesn't mean kumbaya, zen, I am happy and at peace and I can totally make lemonade out of these lemons. But it means we need to think about how we expend our energy and what is changeable, if you will, and what isn't. And it doesn't also mean sort of, oh, I just have to give in or give up or I have no control. It really means thoughtfully and intentionally considering where should I exert my control? How should I exert my control? And this idea of there is a pandemic. There is. We do right now need to continue wearing masks within those constraints and guidelines of reality. what else can I do? How can I still see friends? How can I still have fun? How can I still find time to be social and engage with others and exercise and do some of those things? And how can I find some time also to make sure I get some rest and I recognize and give myself time to process how confusing some of this world is? And part of that idea of radical acceptance is being sort of willing to consider those options and consider the limits of them. If you kind of think about a little kid sort of tantruming, going like, I don't want to wear a coat, I refuse to wear a coat, versus like, oh, an older kid, oh, I don't really like wearing a coat, it's a little uncomfortable, but it's cold outside and it does keep me warm. And so, yeah, let me find the most comfortable coat I can. And maybe when I get inside, I'll take that coat off as quickly as I can. So working with the reality that we have. And Stacy, I can't see if people are putting up, I'm not paying attention to the chat. If you are, let me know, flag me if there are any questions coming in.
I will, I'm on it, thank you.
So given all these things, if we think about accepting some of the constraints and the realities that we have, thinking ahead to this year, how do we want to approach this year? And again, back to the you, how do I as a parent, how do I as a person, how do I as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, all those things. And then really thinking about how might my children, how might my husband, how might my friends and family. And I love this little cartoon that I found, in part because it says tentative planner, which I think in this year, tentative is something that we need to keep in mind, trying to remain flexible, trying to recognize there's always uncertainty, but uncertainty is really heightened this year of we are doing our best and planning our best and coping our best, recognizing with another little asterisk that things may need to shift and that we need to be flexible and aware of that. So I thought that this was a great, in part because it said tentative, and I don't know if everyone can read, but then it says includes 3 rolls of whiteout correction tape, a little extra to make sure that when we say, okay, it's going to be like this, oh no, it's going to be like this, oh no, it's going to be like this, and now it's going to be like this, and it might also be canceled. And unfortunately, you know, I for many years used to do my planner in pencil because it got too hard to mark out stuff. Pencils and erasers and whiteout are more handy than ever. This year, I hope their sales skyrocketed up, but it is a good reminder. And it also, in the sort of frame of radical acceptance, isn't a terrible thing. You know, if one of the things we can learn from this year is how to be a little more flexible, how to be a little more tolerant, that's a great skill. It's a great skill for us as parents. It's a great skill for our children to learn. That tolerance, that flexibility, that curiosity. And when we really think about resilience, which I think is one of the key skills we all want to impart on our children, that is the tolerance, right? I can roll, I can bend, I can bounce. Doesn't mean I don't fall down, but I get back up. And this has been quite a year of getting things thrown at us and recognizing we really do have to bend. So that is really key. So I would ask some questions of all of you, and I will share a little of my own answers, and then would love to open it up to see if people have others to think about, given what we've learned, what we continue to learn, and what we want to roll forward. You know, lots of people have talked about resetting and going back to normal. I would like to challenge everyone to think about, rather than going back, as we think and just sort of restarting or resetting, or let's go back to the way things were, let's really think about, this isn't a chance for a bit of a new start, a bit of a tweak, if you will, a little revision. So how would we like this year to go? What would you like to preserve? What was something that maybe over the pandemic actually turned out to be sort of a silver lining or a positive thing for yourself, for your family, for your children? What's something you'd like to shift? What was sort of a pandemic residue that you thought, oh, I cannot wait to go back to doing this, or I realize I've really missed that? What's something maybe you would like to try? Definitely something you'd like to learn. And then a little bit of coping and planning and thinking ahead in terms of what could get in the way. And I put up a few pictures here, some of the things that myself and my family appreciated during the pandemic. I'm going to start with the Oreos because I think that's the most important one. I learned from my children that Oreos can be an appetizer. I used to think that if you had an Oreo before a meal, a few Oreos before a meal, it would wreck your dinner. my children, over the course of the pandemic, where we were together all the time and you sort of saw all their habits and what they eat, I learned they can polish off many Oreos before dinner and still eat dinner. So that was something that we learned. And now that has become sort of a saying in our house of Oreos make a great appetizer. Which is just a funny little thing, but sort of when you recognize, wow, I see everything my kids are doing now, and we're all together, both in terms of eating habits and watching my own little sort of mom nag, dare I say, of being like, don't eat that and you'll wreck your meal, and going, nope, they seem fine with that. On the flip side, the opposite, I don't know if anyone is a Peloton rider, but we had actually gotten a Peloton before the pandemic, but used it a lot during the pandemic. And Cody became a favorite instructor in my house. And we became, both myself, my kids, and then a few of our friends started the Cody saying of the day. And we would text or email on this sort of fun group text, sort of our favorite funny things he said. And it became not only a fun way to exercise, but also a fun way to keep connections with people in terms of making each other laugh or sending a screenshot of him doing a funny dance move or saying something funny. The other thing that I really have worked to preserve and recognize it was a nice shift for me was in the upper right corner is one of our dogs, Nellie. And Nellie actually, for some of you, I don't think we came into the New Canaan schools, but I think we visited a few of the New Canaan libraries. Nellie's actually a trained therapy dog, although she is semi-retired now, she's gotten older. But she and I used to go visit schools, libraries, senior centers, and it was something I really missed doing with her over the course of the pandemic. It was something that she actually enjoyed, that I enjoyed, and it was a way to participate in the community. And it was something I really missed. The thing that I gained, though, is I no longer had to walk the dogs alone, which was my old routine. Was the kids would go off to school, I would take the dogs on a walk. Having the kids around more, I really got to walk with them more. And now that's something, even though they're back in school, I wait and I walk the dogs with them. And it's become a really nice kind of mom-daughter time. The girls take turns. And where at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, oh my gosh, please not another dog walk, because as many of us, we all took probably more walks and more miles than we had before. But now it's become kind of a nice tradition that we preserved in terms of changing the routine, and a nice time to just check in with my kids, hear about their day, get outside a little bit. And then the final little graphic I put up, one of the challenges our family took on was we watched all the Marvel movies, the sort of superhero movies, in order throughout the pandemic. That was a family challenge that we created. And since then, since that ended, we've tried to come up with, we sort of pick a series, either a book series or a movie series. And we've done these family challenges of, okay, like every Friday night for the next month or 2 months or however long it takes us, we're going to view a different movie. And it just becomes a fun thing for families to do together. And so, you know, I think really thinking about as a family, as an individual, as a family, what are some of the things that we'd like to carry over, that we'd like to continue from the pandemic? What were shifts to our family, to our parenting style, to our kind of way of interacting and our way of being that actually were kind of nice and beneficial? And I use the word preserve really intentionally, because I think as things have reopened, and there are some people who, you know, can't wait to get back out there and kind of want to make up for lost time, trying to preserve a few of those things from the pandemic, whether they were those slower moments, those together moments, some of the fun things we did, and figure out how we can continue to integrate those into our family lives. As well as, are there some things we said we would do during the pandemic? I know when everything came to a halt, many people, it was going to bake bread, or I promised myself I was going to take another course to get my Spanish back up to fluency. Never happened. You know, I said I was going to clean every closet in the house. I cleaned like 2 of them. You know, what were some of the things that we said we were going to do that maybe we didn't carry through? And how do we make time to do those? As well as if there are things we recognize we want to continue to learn or want to learn. And then also thinking about what could get in the way. I'm not sure if anyone wants to take a moment and share a little bit in terms of, are there things that, that they recognized over the course of the pandemic, especially as we think about in the context of how do we want this year to look? Where can we exert some control and some influence in terms of how we parent, how our kids are, how our family operates, anything that they would like to integrate or shift?
Michelle, I think one of the questions that has come through here is that we all have found things that we'd like to preserve, but now that we're back hitting the ground running, and your question here, what could get in the way? There are many things. So how do we actually make the things happen that we preserved, that we were grateful for in the quiet time?
Sure. You know, I think some of it is really, and I don't want to sound whether it's psychologist-y or new agey, but saying very intentionally and mindfully, making it clear to ourselves and to our family, this is really important. We as humans, we know what goes on sometimes we know what goes on in our head, not always, but we kind of assume it's pretty obvious to everyone else. And I think being really clear with both the messaging and the modeling that we say to our family, we say to our kids, and sort of whether it's saying, all right, I am committing to do this, and I'll talk about commitment in a little bit, or making it really clear of, hey girls, so instead of walking the dogs in the morning, I really want to do a walk. We can alternate, but I want to do a walk in the afternoon with you. So let's think about the schedule this week. What time? I know you have field hockey practice, and I know you have SAT prep, or I know you got to work on your college application, but let's take a look on Sunday at what your schedule for the week is, because I really want to make sure we block 20 minutes, 2 days with you, 2 days with you to go on a dog walk. Or I know you've got a social schedule now that you're a teenager, but we're only halfway through those Marvel movies or through the Hunger Games series or through whatever we're watching. So what night works for you guys? If you're doing something with your friends on Friday, let's block Saturday night, or let's block Sunday afternoon, and having conversations as a family where you make it clear that this really is a priority. I think the other thing that we can do, especially as parents, is to kind of check ourselves, right? I don't know about other parents. I love not having to run my kids around to a million activities over the pandemic. I like my car, I like the time in the car with kids, but it was great, that sort of where we don't have to be on the go. What I really missed, and I don't think I fully appreciated it till one of my daughters had finally, after a while, her best friend could come over, and I missed having my kids' friends in the house. I missed sort of cooking for the group of them and having them all like on the couch watching a movie, doing stuff. So I think really, thinking about those things, and just because we're sort of going back, your kid doesn't have to do 8 million activities. You don't have to rush and do all these things. There are many options that are opening again. Just because they're out there doesn't mean we have to jump into them. And I think both having a conversation with yourself and your spouse, your partner, and your children to say, look, I know now you can do field hockey, you can do art class, you can do horseback riding, you can do this, but really kind of asking them, because if they're the type of kid that loves that, and some kids love running from something to another, other kids and other families recognize, oh, it's sort of nice to only have 1 or 2 activities or not do that. And if you have that conversation with your family to say, really make it a priority and commit to saying, you know what, how about we scale back a little bit this year? I don't know about you, but it was sort of nice when, Monday through Thursday, it wasn't, we go from school and we go here and we go here and we go here and we go here. I kind of liked having that. So I don't know, what do you think? Could we make sure there's a day that at least is a slower day, or could we balance out those activities? And really having those conversations, reminding ourselves, again, that idea of we do have these options. We don't have to get back on the treadmill. We don't have to follow the trajectory that was before. And, as someone who, I grew up in Fairfield County, I graduated from Staples High School many, 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 many years ago. Fairfield County is an amazing place to grow up and raise your kids in. It has wonderful resources and opportunities. It also is a funky place to grow up in and raise your kids in, and both be a kid and be a parent in, because there's so much going on. But really kind of considering, what do we want to do? What do we really need to do? How do we feel doing these things? We do have choices there. And I think the pandemic gave us time to really kind of think about what's worth it, what's not, where can we slow down? And many people, I used to laugh, in even mindfulness in Fairfield County was like a competitive sport, like, oh, I did my meditation for, how many did you do your meditation? How many minutes did you it doesn't have to necessarily be that way. And I think this is a really good time to remind ourselves, sometimes we're the ones who get in the way of thinking, but I have to do this. Well, do I really have to do it? And back to the idea of where did we start? What kind of parent are we? What's our activity level, our energy level? Where's our kids? And if we have a kid that we saw over the course of the pandemic that maybe a little more sleep time, maybe a little less structured activity was actually good for them, let's keep that. What can we do about that? That was a very long-winded answer, but I hope it got somewhere. Sorry, Bill.
No, for myself, one thing I tried to do was kind of give myself permission. Like when the pandemic started, I was doing things I never got to do. So I was making my daughter breakfast as I was sending videos out for the school, the school. And I didn't get a chance to do that. And I knew I wouldn't be able to continue that once we were back to somewhat normal and back to school, So I got a month of that or whatever until I was back to work in June. But I really enjoyed that. And for me, I think one of the things I did was I gave myself permission a little bit. I've been a little bit of a workaholic. Again, you talk about Fairfield County. I think it's the same mantra. You got to make sure you're doing everything all the time. And for myself, I said, you know what? I want to be a participant in my daughter's life. So whether it's picking up from volleyball, getting almost every game if I can, things I wasn't necessarily doing before the pandemic, I made a decision to myself that I am going to do that, and I can still do my job effectively. So realistically, I just kind of reshifted my priorities a little bit. And really, what's a healthier thing to do anyway? So for myself, I kind of did what you were saying and just reshifted myself a little.
Well, and I think those shifts are really powerful. And I think the pandemic gave us such a contrast, right? Because we were, especially Fairfield County community, everyone runs at like 120 miles an hour. And then we were forced to totally shut down. I think a lot of people are now, how do we get back to 120? And I'd like to challenge everyone to say, well, hold on, let's think about where we want to go back to on the continuum. Do we necessarily need to go back to 120? I think for some of us, like 85 is just fine. And
90 still speeding.
Exactly. Well, and I think this idea of moderation, and again, in part because of our world, in part because we're Fairfield County, we go big, right? So it's like, I'm not just going to give myself permission to take 10 minutes. I'm going to take a weekend and I'm going to do all these big things. I encourage us as parents and as people, and also to model for our kids, where are the little moments? So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Part of that sort of walking the middle path and sort of middle ground thinking is, well, you're right. I work has picked up and there's more things I have to do, but can I carve out 15 or 20 minutes to, sit with my kid or go for a walk? Or maybe I can't make breakfast every day because I have some early clients or early meetings, but I'm going to commit to like one day a week or maybe 2 days a week of doing this. So where are the pieces that we can sort of hold on to and integrate? And I think being really explicit and direct about that with ourselves, with our partners, our spouses, and with our kids, where we really say the same way, if I have a meeting, in my book that I can't change, I can put down, I am going to be home on Wednesday morning, late so I can have breakfast with my kids, or I am that class with Cody, or that walk with my friends, or that, dinner with our kids and watching that movie. That's in the book. Everyone knows how important that is. That's not one of those where we say, oh, I'm too busy, I don't have time. That's in there, and that's a top priority. And I think carving out, even giving ourselves permission both to do that and to give ourselves the time to talk about that. Because many things that happen for a lot of families is we're so busy, right? We don't even know. But whether you say, okay, Sunday afternoon, we're going to do, sounds kind of hokey, but we're going to do like a 15-minute family meeting. What's everyone's schedule for the week? Here are the things. Remember, we do want to get that last Marvel movie in, or we're all going to try that new recipe or that new restaurant for takeout together. So what night works well for everyone? And really kind of committing as a family and making it really clear and explicit to do that. And I think, to your point too, the permission is key. We all, in many ways, were given permission with the pandemic. We need to own that permission and remind ourselves we can give it to ourselves without the pandemic. That ability to slow down, that ability to make time for each other, that ability to make time to do these things, that's essential. And it's something we all deserve and we're all entitled to, and we don't need the shutdown to sort of force it. We need to integrate that for ourselves.
Piggybacking on Mr. Egan, both of his comments, and shifting toward the child's perspective, what would be your best piece of advice for the kids who are adapting to full-on academics again, like he mentioned, as well as full-on sports? I don't necessarily think they may have the time or the ability to carve out what you just talked about. But that's a moment in time. What's your advice for them to assimilate back into what was? Because I do believe the expectations of the teachers and the coaches, it's full on, despite the fact that everything isn't completely normal, that part is.
Well, so, I do think it's important we acknowledge the rust factor that we all have.
What factor?
I call it the rust factor.
Rust.
We're all a little rusty. Like, we've all got a little different level of rust and residue from the pandemic. And I think it's essential we recognize that in ourselves. I think it's really important. And I've done a lot of talks with teachers and staff and educators for both themselves as well as how to talk to children about that. And to recognize it's the same way if, I don't know about many of you, I don't ride a bike most of the time during the winter. Every spring when I take out my bicycle, I'm a little more wobbly for those first few rides. Like I'm not as fluent on it. This getting back up and running at this pace, we haven't done this in a while, and we really did hit the ground running pretty hard this fall. And I think, Courtney, you mentioned before everyone came on, September is usually a blur for most of us with kids in school, because it's like, oh my gosh, what do we need? Who do I need to write a check to? Like, where am I supposed to be? It's like that September, like totally blur. As we get into October, things settle a little bit. And this is where we often start feeling it, because the novelty at the beginning of the year has worn off. It's getting a little colder, it's getting darker earlier, and everyone starts feeling the pace. I think where you can, to give feedback to whether it's coaches or teachers, and let them know if you have kids that you're seeing that they're feeling the strain or they're struggling to keep the old pace, and see where there might be opportunity. I think it's really important to have conversations with our kids so that they learn how to identify and label and recognize that in themselves. A lot of kids, a lot of adults for that matter, don't even recognize burnout or exhaustion till it's over the top, right? Till you absolutely need the entire day or the entire weekend, or you need to crash. We want to be able to cue our kids and cue ourselves to recognize when we're starting to feel a little bit of that, so we can that's where that 20 minutes or maybe, taking the evening off from doing something, or that little bit of break can do a lot, versus when you're totally fried, you really need that bigger, batch of recovery. So I think having conversations with your kids, if you notice that they're sort of feeling it, or if they're telling you they are, to really engage them in that conversation, to empathize and validate of like, oh, that feeling is the worst, where you feel like you're overwhelmed and you're exhausted, to really get them to think creatively about where might there be a place that they can take a step back, or take a step, take a moment. Is there a club meeting maybe they don't need to go to? Is there a practice or a way to reach out to the coach to say, hey, I'm feeling the strain of this, both physically and psychologically. I'm a big believer, and I don't know, Mr. Egan, how you're going to feel about this, but we can't always do our best. Like, I feel like I say that in Fairfield County, and there are people going to pick it outside my house tomorrow. But as adults, we can't do our best 100% of the time. And part of being an adult is learning, where do I conserve and where do I give my best, right? Sometimes it's like, good enough is good enough for this one. Whether it's, well, this paper, it's an important paper, I don't want to do a sort of a terrible job, but this paper is only worth a little bit of my grade, and I've got this bigger thing going on. So this is a just make it work, get it done moment. That's where I put that effort. And that sort of best give everything, I might hold that for this other project that either is a bigger part of my grade or means more, or I also might just be extra tired today. And you know what, to spend 5 hours working on this paper, that's going to fry me and exhaust me. And you know what, I think I can do a pretty good paper in 2 hours, and that extra 3 hours of sleep, I think that's a better calculation. So I think that's where really engaging with our kids, talking to them about how they can modify that, and then certainly reaching out to whether it's the coach, the teacher, the guidance counselor at the school to get them to complement and reinforce that. I work with many teachers across schools for a lot of clients, where one of the things we really ask teachers to do is give kids more specific guidelines about how much effort to put in, about how long something's going to take. So that they know, no, this is not, I don't want you working 4 hours and staying up all night on this assignment. I've rarely met a teacher who wants a kid to burn out for their class, or I've rarely met a coach who wants a student athlete to burn out for a practice. So often getting that complementary perspective and getting, you know, sometimes teenagers especially, I can't, no, the teacher, I can't talk to them about that. No, they want, I don't know, kiddo, let's reach out. I want to hear what that teacher or that coach has to say. Often kids are really surprised because coaches and teachers tend to be more supportive when you engage them in that conversation.
A couple things, just if I could add to that, you know, I think it's really important we communicate. You know, we've asked our kids to be, we want to make them accountable, right? So we're saying, okay, you reach out to the teacher, you do this. And I do the same with my child, you know, she's a junior, and that's all important. But the one thing I am looking at for my own child is, are you overwhelmed, right? So there's a couple areas, you know, and I heard this week from a parent, you know, they've got a C right now, and they've never had a C in high school. Now, part of it, they haven't been really in high school the way normal high school's been in 3 years, you know? So it's a struggle and it's a lot of work, you know, taking multiple AP classes. And let's face it, you know, in this community, there are people who are CEOs, the tops of their professions in every area of life. So that's what they know. They know to be driven, they know success, and that's what they want to be. But I think the one thing that sometimes we forget is communicate. You know, as a district, we're trying, I'm talking to our teachers too. It's still a pandemic. These guys are overwhelmed. Be careful, be cognizant of how much we're asking. I get we're trying to get back to school. We're trying to accomplish a lot, and you care about kids, but be aware of it. But I'm also asking families, reach out to your teachers, reach out to your counselor. Let them know if you're overwhelmed so that we can have discussions about the best ways to handle things. Because while we're doing the best we can, it doesn't mean we're doing the best for every individual child, and we need to make sure that we are where we can. So if there's a concern, we need to communicate and work with, whether it be a teacher or a guidance counselor or anyone, it could be a coach. And if parents can and slow down, that's great. But I also understand the community we're in, and also the life that we're in, right? We're trying to give the best possible options for our kids post high school. I get that. And we also want to have balance for our kids. So you want to give them those fun things to be able to do. I get that. But all of it comes with some choices sometimes and some tough decisions. And part of that really is having the ability, or first of all, encouraging a child, yes, to communicate. But also as adults, we need to be able to communicate with the adults in our children's lives and not just put it on our kids, because I think sometimes that's where they're not really prepared for it.
Well, and it's so great to have you here, and because you're reinforcing the message, you're leading into the next slide. It's perfect. It's like, I couldn't have asked for a better setup.
I apologize. I'm sorry I'm talking to you.
No, I love it. It's great. But, you know, I think that also, it ties in so much of what I'm addressing, because remember, teen brains, they do think differently. And they are not as good at integrating all that data, taking all those perspectives, which is why a lot of teens especially are super hesitant, ambivalent, even resistant to reaching out to the coach, to reaching out to the teacher, because they go to that default of like, no, I know what they want, or they wouldn't understand, or this is what they're going to say, when actually they don't. And that's actually a little bit of a flawed thinking process of theirs. They're not as good at taking in all those data and taking in that perspective. So often, I think that is a great role for us as parents to encourage our kids and help facilitate that conversation with teachers, with coaches, and just say, you know, I remember hearing that teacher talk at the back to school Zoom or the video, or I remember hearing the principal say, I don't know, let's ask about this, because I wonder if we're missing some information. Let's at least see what they say before you decide. And encouraging our kids, or sometimes helping, facilitate that conversation. I think that's also that, the idea of limited choices yet still choices is that idea of radical acceptance. We can't completely change everything, but we have some options, we have some choices. And sometimes the choice is, I'm going to miss that practice, or I'm going to miss, that assignment, I'm not going to do the extra credit there because my time is better spent. And helping our kids recognize there's a limited menu, like you can't have everything on the menu. So what feels most doable, what feels most important, helping set up that conversation, and then the modeling piece. Because I think if we as parents can be really explicit, I know I've had days where I'll come home and I'll say, okay, I overdid today. I stretched myself way too thin. Or you know what? This has been a week where my balance was way off. I worked too many hours. I worked too late. I didn't get to take the exercise class. I skipped lunch, where I'll explicitly say, man, it got a little away from me this week. Oh, how'd that happen? Let me think. How'd I lose it? How'd I overbook myself? What'd I do? All right, what's my plan for next week? Because I don't like how this feels and I really want to do something different. And I think the more we can model that in our homes and talk to our kids, not in a critical way to them or to ourselves, but where we can model it, if we see them, we can gently point that out. I had a conversation with my sophomore in the car to ride to school today where I said, yeah, so can we talk about last night? Because it seemed like, she was frazzled. She had too much homework. She didn't get stuff done. She managed her time not so great. And I literally used the word collaboration with her. I said, and it was a very psychologist mom conversation on the way to school. And I got the typical eye roll, but I still put it out there. And I was like, yeah, can we think, I know we don't have to figure it out right now, but I just want to put a placeholder for this conversation. I think we might have to kind of rethink, what else could we do there? Because that was like a super stressful, no fun night for you. I wasn't sure how best to support you. What can we do next? Which kind of leads into these ideas about, ahead, all the C's that I put out there. First of all, really considering our child, what we know about our child, their temperament, their style, their options, that idea of, are they on a team? Are they taking APs? Are they really grade driven, or what are their expectation standards given all that we know? And then communicating directly, explicitly, and often. And communication is different than sort of giving a speech or a monologue. Communicate is a two-way street. So it's sharing what we think, what we're observing, it's asking them for input, it's a back and forth, it's a dialogue. And we want to make sure they're a really active part, and then collaborate with our kids, work together to figure out what can we shift, what can we do, where can we, who else can we collaborate with? Is this where we do reach out to the guidance counselor, the coach, the teacher, the friend, the whomever? Who are the people, who are the players we can get involved? And then commit to trying something. All right, let's give this a try, whether it's for a day or a week or tonight. Let's try and see. And then checking in, how's it going? How'd this work? Did we get the feedback from the teacher that was helpful? Did, instead of doing 4 dance classes a week, only doing 3 dance classes a week? How'd that work? Does it seem a little different? And then reconsider, is there anything we need to shift? And then communicate about it, go back to, and it's sort of that cycle of ongoing. But the key for all this is ensuring we have time to do it. Because when we're running so busy and when we're ships in the night, this deserves the time and attention. It deserves, whether it's the conversation on the weekend or that check-in, not when your kid is running out the door, not when you and your spouse are seeing each other before you tumble into bed or things like that. It's really preserving and ensuring that we have time to do these things. I think I only have one more I want to zip through so we can. So I thought this was a great little slide that made me chuckle. Remember, it's the journey, it's not the destination. And we really want to pay attention to that journey and how the journey is feeling us. It's the old race to nowhere idea of why are we taking this path? I know that's where we want to go, but is this path worth it? And really consider the path we're on and the pacing of it. Where are there options to change the path? Where are there options to adjust the pacing? and really taking stock of ourselves. What's the message and the model that we're setting for our kids? And then finally, because I like to leave everyone with a little laugh, when we think about what have we learned, the title of this, there's the lessons we've learned, the lessons we've relearned in the Department of Oh for Crying Out Loud. And I think as humans being compassionate to ourselves also of we're still figuring it out. We're still actively learning. There are still more loops to come in this roller coaster we're on. And this is where we're trying, we're thinking, we're pausing, we're considering it, we're trying. And sometimes, part of this is recognizing, what, we thought we had good intentions, we had a good idea, didn't pan out, it didn't work, or we got thrown such a curveball. We did the best we could. We maybe did good enough. What can we do next? So I definitely want to stop talking and invite feedbacks, comments, questions, any other ways I can be of help or support.
Dr. Albright, can I ask one question that I think about, and again, I hate to relate to my own child, but I think it's a very comparable thing for what our kids are going through. What's the difference between teaching a child healthy resilience, like this is hard, this is a tough phase, you're going to get through it, and we've got to navigate it healthy, versus maybe if something's unhealthy? Like,
Sure.
Where is that line? Because I think that's the piece that many parents struggle with, right? And at least for me, I'll speak for me, and I'll take my principal hat off now. I want to push my child to be the best she can be, but I don't want her to do it in a way that's unhealthy.
Yeah.
I want her to be healthy and balanced and be able to do things, but I do want to challenge her to build that grit and resilience that is so vital that you see in life. So what's the balance between healthy resilience and grit and something's unhealthy? Where is that line?
Such a great question. I wish I could give you the litmus test that said, like, dunk this in water for 2 seconds, and if it's blue, you're over the line. If it's pink, you're below the line and you're great. I think what's so challenging is it's a little different for everyone. And we often don't recognize what's too much until it's too much, right? And I think that's where this idea of kids need to make mistakes. They need to have challenges. They need to have a little struggle to sort of build that muscle. But what's too much? Like, what's that horrible scar versus that little scar that you recognize you're stronger from, versus the one that is really, it's like impossible to recover and never heals. And, I think that this is where parent gut comes in and instinct. And I think this is where communication is key, because that's where we don't if you think about even for yourself, it's sort of hard to operationalize and define, but it's sort of this instinctive of where, I feel like, I know I did a little too much, right? Or I know I pushed it a little too far. I think the best thing we can do to at least find that range is having conversations and being honest about, all right, is this, kind of on the scale of overwhelming? Is it manageable, or is it feeling hard to manage? And this is when you think back to sort of, where'd your kid start? What do you know about your kid? We often know some of their tells and their cues and their signs, right? There are some kids, if they say I'm stressed, they're like overwhelmed stressed. There are other kids, the minute they feel a little bit, they get super stressed. So really thinking of that context of where are those sort of boundaries traditionally for my child, really taking in what I'm seeing and then asking them. And I think, if you're seeing significant distress in your children, if sleep is disrupted, if eating is disrupted, if you're seeing those bigger behavior changes, those are indicative that something's gone and they're having, versus is it they're expressing they're having a hard time, they're sort of open in discussions with you about figuring out how to manage it. You can kind of see them actively or proactively using some strategies or being receptive to some of that and doing something. And it's sort of a dip that they're coming back from, versus those drops where kids are really flattened by it. those are some of sort of the general. Believe me, I wish I could give you the exact, and I wish there was a supercomputer. How old do I sound saying supercomputer? Where we could put in like, okay, my child's gender, age, and oh, okay, here's the exact 5 signs to look for. But I think if you're concerned, if you're seeing things in your child, that's where I would say get some backup. That's where you reach out to your teachers and you check in, like your kids' teachers, how are they doing? You check in with pediatrician, you talk to your kids and just saying, hey, how's it going? Like I am getting the sense you seem a little more stressed, you seem a little more distracted. You don't seem to be going out with your friends or enjoying, I'm seeing these little signs. And you ask them kind of, how is it feeling for them? How are they managing? And you can share a bit for you, maybe, like I know myself, I know some of those kind of warning signs. I know when I recognize, oh, I haven't exercised, or I haven't gotten the dogs out, or I skipped lunch or skipped breakfast, or I'm driving over the speed limit because realize I'm running late. Like those are the cues I know for myself. And you can sort of use some of those as suggestions and as primers for your kids in terms of what might you notice. But the goal of the conversation is to help them cue onto that. I also am a big believer that it's okay and actually really important to recognize when we've committed to too much and when we need to step back from something. And I think one of the dangers, if you will, or the dark sides of grit and resilience is it sort of caused us to push into like, it's supposed to be hard and just do it, and recognize we all sometimes need that either exit strategy or that sort of evacuation or package, and sometimes to be able to say, you know what, I can't go to that meeting tonight, or I can't make that practice, or you know what, I realize I do have to drop out of that club and I feel really badly about doing it, and I'm going to try and do it in a responsible, respectful way. But I think I've taken on too much. And I think often, again, the way our kids' brains are wired, they don't often consider that an option. And I think because often our community, our society, we don't often allow that as an option. And I think that's really important. And that's not quitting after one day of something, but sometimes recognizing, you know what, I either need to, maybe I'll still be a part of the club, but I can't be the president or the co-president or the whatever. Or you know what, maybe I can't be on this team, or maybe I do have to drop down from that AP class to something. I think reminding our kids about those options, engaging other people in that conversation too, to remind them of that isn't necessarily a failure. That's actually a really good self-protective, self-preservation thing to do, to recognize, I think I'm in over my head, giving them permission that it's okay to do that, and coaching and guiding them on a responsible, respectful way to do that. I try and model that with my children. I stepped down from a board recently where I said, look, I love this cause. I support this cause. I've missed a bunch of the past meetings. I can't commit to it right now. I feel badly doing that. And I was very truthful and honest with the other board members and said, I'm really sorry. And I talked to my kids very openly about how I really struggled doing that part of me felt like I was letting people down. But I also recognized a story I sometimes tell is I was supposed to go to a dinner with some friends sort of a little while ago. And I said to them, hey guys, as much as I want to see you, I got to go home to my kids. It's been one of those weeks and I love you girls, but like, I need to spend some time with my kids. One of them's had a rough day. And one of my friends was so great. She said to me, do you know, I love that you said that to me, because I sometimes feel that way. And I feel like I can't say that. And I'm so happy you did. So I think the more we can do that for ourselves, the more we can engage our kids in conversations about how it feels, and reminding them that there are options, and some of them might be a little uncomfortable, but there are ways to work through that. And they're getting other people to echo into that chorus. So it's not just us as their parents saying it, but other people too. And again, kind of a long-winded roundabout answer that I hope sort of got to that as best as I could to say. But I think anytime if your parent radar is going off to say, ooh, I think this might be much, that's a primer to start the conversation and ask them and start cueing them to consider how they're feeling. Because again, teenagers they're not always so great at catching those lower levels of emotion and the beginnings, the rumblings of it. And we want to help cue them to do that better.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm looking, I know we're a little over an hour. I do have 2 questions in the chat. So we invite you to stay on to hear the questions or ask any questions you may have, or please feel free if you have to leave, you can do that as well. So Michelle, one of these questions, and circling back to family time, what parents sometimes struggle with is that they know their children give so much of themselves during the day, school, sport, etc., everything else. And they come home and they want to rejuve and be in their room and just have a little downtime. So how do you manage that with wanting to preserve the family time you had during the pandemic?
Sure. And I'll also, I want to answer that. And also, Mr. Egan, to what you said, I can send Stacy, there's a great little sort of 2-sheet highlight in terms of what's typical for teens and adolescents versus when to worry. That might also be a helpful informative guide too. So Stacy, I can send the link to that to you, and maybe when you follow up with anyone who attended, we can blast that too, that I think gives not quite the litmus test, but a little more directive in terms of that. And I think this is also a great question about how do we respect sort of our kids and their exhaustion and energy levels, but also want to preserve that family time. I think this is where conversations become really helpful and engaging our kids and helping us decide when is the best time for family time. As I said, if we've got teenagers right after school, school's a lot for kids. School and practice, it takes a lot of mental and physical and psychological energy, and giving our kids downtime to sort of detox in their room and chill out and be on their own is really valuable. And for many of us too, like by Friday, we're kind of exhausted. So, I think having that conversation with your kids to say, hey, we really do like to have, whether it's a night or an afternoon or a breakfast or an hour together, being a little more creative in what you think of for family time. Family time doesn't have to be like 3 hours and a meal. For some families, it's we're going to walk the dogs together. For some families, instead of dinner, it's brunch on Sunday. For some families, it's, a game night. So thinking a little more creatively about what the options are, and then engaging your kids in conversations of, all right, this is important to us as your parents, but we also recognize like you're a teenager and you've got some plans and you've got some say. So like, here's kind of given the weekend or given the week, what do you think would be best with your schedule? And that doesn't mean we do exactly what they want or what they say, but we engage them in that conversation. If they say, hey, like Friday night, I'm usually really tired and I'd sort of rather not do it on Friday. Okay, so then would Saturday night, or do we want to try an afternoon thing? Because if you like having plans with your friends, maybe we do like an early dinner, maybe we do an afternoon dog walk, or, what else? Maybe go on a bagel run on Sunday. What could work? So finding a way that you, again, still prioritize and preserve that that's important as a thing for our family, but show some willingness and flexibility to consider it with their schedule. And then you hold them to it, right? Because some of this, what we want to prime also is that prefrontal cortex, that problem solving, thinking, planning ahead. Teens are terrible at time management. If you ask them on Wednesday what their plans are for the weekend, they have no idea. If you ask them Friday at 4:30 what their plans are for the weekend, they have no idea. But if you make it clear of like, all right, so we're going to do a hike on Sunday from 10 to 12, block that on your calendar. So, yep, let your friends know you can meet them at 12:30, you can do this. You don't necessarily have to wait for them, but some of this is cueing and teaching and priming them to, okay, I gotta plan for this. I gotta work through this. And I think it's done in sort of a collaborative way.
2 things about that. So one, the link that you were talking about, I know you're sort of interacting the entire time, but if you have it handy and could send it to Stacy, she can put it in the chat.
Okay, cool.
Get that. And the second thing is, I may be misinterpreting that question, but I think it sounded more like they were asking, on the day-to-day, certainly making family time for the week, but the day-to-day, is it okay? Is it healthy? Is it reasonable if your kid's at school all day and then they're at sports and then they want to go up to their room to chill and do their homework, and it becomes sort of, this is the pattern. I mean, is that acceptable? Acceptable is the wrong word because everybody's got different expectations, but what are your thoughts on the day-to-day like that?
Well, I think it is to some level, and it also depends on your kid, right? And not to sound sort of like a politician with all these, well, if, but. But again, if you have a kid who, when they come home, says like, hey, mom, I'm exhausted. I have a lot of homework. They seem to be in decent spirits. They seem to be in decent mood. They want to go to their room because their room is the place they tend to be most efficient doing their homework. And, they're like, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to knock out this homework. And it's sort of driven by coming from a place where it's their plan, they feel okay about it, and it's sort of more adaptive, if you will. If you have a kid who sort of brushes past you, looks like they're going to burst into tears, slams their door, and you don't hear from them again, that's a little more worrisome, so some of it is sort of the feel and the tone of it. Some of it is, again, where's your baseline? If you have a kid who they've always been like that, right? Their room is their sort of temple where they go in and they chill and they love their room, and they're continuing to do that. That sets up a different thing versus if you have a kid who usually is always downstairs with you, always talking, and now all of a sudden they're brushing past you and going into their room for hours. Again, that's a little more notable and worth some follow-up. I think even if you have, it's okay to ask your kid to say, hey, I know you have a lot of work and I know you have a lot of practice. I'd love just to have 10 minutes to like sit and either hear how your day was, or, like have a bowl of ice cream with you, or just like watch a YouTube video or something, so you can also mandate and request some of that as long as you're respectful of doing it. And how you do it and where you do it. Saying to a kid, you must come right home after practice and talk to me for 15 minutes. Yeah, that's probably not going to fly. And that may not be their style, their temperament. They may need to first shower and chill and sort of take a breath. And maybe for them, it works best when it's like right before bed, right? If it's like a 10:30 to 10:45, that's where I'm feeling a little more relaxed. That's where I'm chill. I'm happy to have a conversation with you while I have my bowl of ice cream, or, to catch up on the day. Some kids, they get home from school and it's like they want to share everything from the day. So some of that is a little bit of think about your kid, think about your kid's temperament, style, the history, and what fits. But we deserve some FaceTime with our kids, and I think it is a nice way to make sure we have a little bit of that check-in, a little bit of that communication, but we want to be mindful of their time frame, their pacing might not exactly sync with ours. So that's where given a little room. And again, what's the tone of it? If it really is more of like, I'm hiding out in my room because I can't deal and I can't face anyone, versus like, I love my room, I love studying in there, I love hanging on my bed and doing that, kind of different setup.